Never shall innocent blood be shed. Yet the blood of the wicked shall flow like a river. The three shall spread their blackened wings and be the vengeful striking hammer of God. You people have been chosen to reveal our existence to the world. You will witness what happens here today, and you will tell of it later. All eyes to the front. You must watch, dear. It'll all be over soon.
Now you will receive us! We do not ask for your poor, or your hungry. We do not want your tired and sick.
It is your corrupt we claim.
It is your evil that will be sought by us.
With every breath, we shall hunt them down.
Each day, we will spill their blood till it rains down from the skies.
Do not kill, do not rape, do not steal. These are principles which every man of every faith can embrace.
These are not polite suggestions. These are codes of behavior. And those of you that ignore them will pay the dearest cost.
There are varying degrees of evil. We urge you lesser forms of filth, not to push the bounds and cross over into true corruption, into our domain.
For if you do, one day you will look behind you and you will see we three. And on that day, you will reap it.
And we will send you to whatever God you wish.
And shepherds we shall be, for thee, my Lord, for thee. Power hath descended forth from thy hand. May swiftly carry out thy command. So we shall flow river forth to thee, and teeming with souls shall it ever be.
In nomine Patri.
Et Filii, Spiritus Sancti.
How far are we gonna take this star?
The question is not how far. The question is, do you possess the Constitution? The depth of faith to go as far as is needed?
Good evening. How's everyone doing?
Hey guys. Well, pretty good. Back to a similar setup.
I was going to say, it did look familiar back there.
Colors different a little bit, different painting in the background, but yeah, essentially the same thing you've seen before.
So, I'm up tonight.
Yeah, I have a boomer message for everyone, though.
Okay, go ahead.
Here we go.
Repent. The end of the world is nigh.
Excellent, Steve. I love it. Because tonight, we are going to spend pretty much the entire episode dunking on that statement. So, before we start, there's a question in the thumbnail, and the question is, can you see the future? And the answer to that question is no. Obviously, I can't see the future. Nick can't see the future. No one here can see the future. However, if you look at history, you might just be able to see a general shape of what our future may hold. I can't promise that the things that we say tonight will come to pass, although I'm going to try and make an argument as to why the statistical odds are in the favor of some of these things coming to pass. Because I'm a stats guy. It's what I do. So,
I have a friend, he's a bit older than me, so definitely a boomer. He believes that the second coming will happen in his lifetime.
Oh, wait. Does it have to do with a new modern state that calls itself Israel?
Yeah, well, we're in the end times.
He
It's
doesn't want to
all
be a
happening.
crispy dispy, does he?
Probably not. I don't know. That's been said. What? People have been convinced we're in the end times for damn near 2,000 years.
Yep.
And it ebbs and flows. So I wouldn't bet on it, but things will unfold as they do. So, yeah, I don't think the end is imminent, but we're in for some bumpy times.
Well, the end times may not be here, and I do recall a certain I can't even say his name on YouTube. I'll say it. Certain Joseph Smith, who was dead convinced that the world was going to end within his lifetime, and he created a whole religion around it, and we're still here. Joseph Smith is not. Unfortunately, his religion still is here too.
Yeah, that's interesting. That a lot of that, crispy dispy dispensationalism. Oh, the end of the world is here. It all kind of started being really popular during the so-called second Great Awakening. That's where you get a lot of these cults coming out of too.
We might have to do a study on that era.
When was the second Great Awakening, Nick?
Oh, like 19th century.
Well, it's specifically later 19th century, right?
No, earlier, I think.
Earlier. Okay.
Yeah,
early 19th actually makes sense on the cycle we'll be talking about tonight.
Yeah, there was a big tent revival thing going on in the teens, right?
Yes, post-Revolutionary War. Yeah.
Well, and it started out in the 1890s, but then there was a big movement in this dispensationalism beliefs in the 70s.
Oh, there's reasons for that. Not the point of tonight episodes, but there are so many reasons for that.
The late great planet Earth. That was a big thing.
Was that Hal Lindsey?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, it turns out that, and we've talked about this before, guys. By the way, we're gonna I'm going to be referencing a bunch of videos we've already done. There's 5 of them in the description of this video. We might even reference more, but as we say on this channel, we tend to go back to topics we've covered before and look at them in different ways, because we're building a tapestry or a picture, of the broader world, and sort of, and we'll get into this, a unified morality is one term for it. But so we're trying to build a cohesive understanding of the world. And so we do routinely go back and revisit topics. I was telling the guys before we start that I'm probably going to piss people off with this one, because I'm going to say things that are not going to be very popular right now. There are certain narratives that are held up by certain interests, some of which are very popular with our crowd, some of which are very not popular. And
Well,
we'll get
in
into that a little
general,
bit.
right now, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Iran, people are on one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But they both, or most of them, want it to end. Just let it be. For instance, let Russia just control that part. Just end it. Okay. And Israel and Iran, who's at fault there? Well, there's varying opinions there. But I think what Plutarch is going to do is bring up an alternative way of thinking, or maybe an alternative reason for favoring one side over another. In any case, he's probably going to challenge our assumptions and beliefs. Am I right or wrong on that?
You are correct. And before I go too far down, because we will be touching on Iran tonight briefly, before we go too far, I want to point out that and it's not on my timeline, but I did a post recently in response to some major creator about the Iran thing. And I said, basically, look, I don't care if we want to sell Israel as many weapons as they can afford. Don't expect me to lift a finger to help either side. Okay. If people want to buy our guns and bombs, I'll sell it to them. But so that is kind of my personal position on the topic. But one of the things that we have to do is we have to set aside our personal beliefs, and particularly when you're looking at the future, you have to look at it and say, well, I might want this outcome or that come, but here's where things actually stand.
Oh, is this like a red pill moment? Like you want to have the fantasy, but facts don't give a crap about your feelings, and
Pretty
that
much, yeah.
feels before reals is actually a kind of a feminine thing.
Yeah,
Well,
and so I might challenge people tonight, as Steve said, a little bit. We're not going to spend too much time
see,
on Iran.
I draw a parallel here with my life, probably Nick's life in divorce court. If my ex-wife and I go to war, why don't you just stay out of it and let us settle it? Then we can both be reasonable. But if she's got the power of the state behind her, it's not fair. So, you know what? I guess my opinion is the same. Iran, Iraq, or Iran and Israel, let them figure it out. sell either side whatever they want, but do not jump in to enforce things, because then peace is less likely. Let them
This is actually
suffer,
true.
whichever side, let them suffer the consequences of their own decisions. Don't take the pain away.
So we
That-
don't need a
that-
repeat of Team America, F yeah.
uh, we really don't. But in my opinion, that's not necessary. And that's where we're going to get into it a little bit tonight. So this episode is built around an interview that a fellow named Neil Howe did recently, about a month ago. And Neil Howe, as you guys know, because we've talked about him before, wrote a book called Generations with a demographer named William Strauss. He wrote a book called The Fourth Turning after that, where they described specifically in their demographic model what they call the fourth turning, which is the upcoming crisis. And that is key. But first, we have to talk a little bit about the third crisis, which you fellows out there know as World War II. And then he wrote another book more recently called The Fourth Turning is Here. That was the one that we mostly focused on in our prior episodes. And I pulled up a bunch of stuff and charts and stuff from that book. And so we won't be going too much into that, but so I'm going to play a clip. The clips are kind of long because these are complex ideas that take a little bit of time to get across. So we'll go ahead and light up the first one here. And here we go.
That feels very true, and this is exactly the part of this I wanted to get into, which was the living in its roles issue, because it's one that feels very relevant to me. I'm I think your definition of Gen X is 65 to 80 roughly in there, which is a little bit shorter than some of the other generations that are alive right now.
It's actually, we define Xers as born in 1961 to 1981. So
okay,
those early 1960s babies, they were about they were still preschool during Woodstock. You know what I mean?
Right. They're not boomers.
They had the throwaway upbringing of a Gen Xer.
Right.
And,
So-
and they were the ones who started coming of age in the early 80s with the down with disco and the new wave and Michael J. Fox and all that.
Right. And that's right down the middle for me, and sort of my colleagues all sort of fit into that mix.
Are you ready for retirement?
Oh, look, we
Our
get to
free
do
retirement
ads.
planner shows you where you
And one thing that has been a topic of conversation amongst sort of peers, mentors, and mentees for the last 5 or 6 years was this feeling that Gen X in particular has sort of never been educated about how to move into the next phase, how to become elders, right? I mean, in your parlance, we were sort of a nomad generation, latchkey kids. And as part of that, it feels like we've missed most of the opportunities to learn what our later roles are supposed to be, or at least historically have been useful to society. Do you have some thoughts about sort of that shift from midlife to eldership and the gap between what we see in the baby boomer generation, which has seemed to be very reluctant to let go of a lot of leadership, and the Gen X community, which honestly feels largely listless, with the exception of some obviously very high profile, very successful Gen Xers in government and industry? Do you have any thoughts about that role transition that we're seeing in the now?
Well, I think Gen X is really an interesting phenomenon, right? And it belongs to a type of generation we call nomad generations. And these are typically raised at a time when no one really cares much about kids, right? I mean, I was talking earlier about throwaway generations. This is the generation that grew up with all the child is devil horror movies, and everything about their generation was bad and contemptible. I mean, let's face it. As soon as they came along, and I think I often say that the Gen X attitude toward themselves is a little bit like the child of divorce writ large. I mean, America was doing great until we came along, so we must be at fault. There must just
I've certainly felt that.
bad seed. You remember that movie, Bad Seed? Anyway,
Oh yeah.
but again, And I do think that when Gen Xers came of age, the whole attitude was most of us were doomed, and only a few of us will be lucky enough to survive, which has.
Okay, I want to stop it right there because he said something very important, and he's talking about the Gen X ethos and how they view the world. And you've probably heard it said in the red pill specifically, this exact idea that the world is doomed.
Yeah.
You've heard from some red pill content creators, enjoy the decline, right? Okay.
That's assuming you're going to be one that enjoys the decline to begin with, if the decline happens the way you think it's going to happen. Yeah.
Correct. Yes. Okay. Now, I want you guys to hold on to that thought, because that thought is going to run through this entire episode that we're doing tonight. Okay. And that's why I stopped it here. I wanted you guys to hear that. This is not new in American history. A similar thing was occurring in the 1910s and 20s. Their version of the nomad generation was also going through this. Everything is doomed. Everything is bad. The Xers had just fought and won World War I. They'd gone through the Spanish flu epidemic, and then the 1920s come along, and while the markets are running, these people are saying, "Oh no, it's all doomed. It's all doomed." You can see it in their writing, their media. You can see all of that. So these cycles appear in history.
There's
And-
another similarity there. The 1880s and 1890s was a period of phenomenal industrial growth and invention, and they did it. Okay, well, parallel that to the 50s and 60s. The U.S. was on top of the world. We were enjoying it. There was a lot of innovation. Our industry was just kicking ass, doing great things, rosy perspective for the future. Then we hit the 70s. Not so good. The energy crisis happened. There were more severe recessions. And coming of age in the early 80s, there were not a lot of jobs out there in the early to mid 80s for college graduates. It was kind of tough.
You mean like now for Gen Z trying to get into?
Yeah, probably very similar.
It's the Gen Z's problems are different, and they will be resolved in a very different way than Gen X did. And that's fun. Don't know that we'll get too much into where Gen Z fits into this. They are what in his so there's there's 4 seasons in each cycle, and so there's 4 different generational archetypes. Nomad, the one you guys call Gen Xers, that's what he calls nomads. Boomers he calls prophets, the prophet generation. They lead the spiritual uprising. The millennials are what he calls the hero generation. They're the ones that actually they do all of the work to resolve the crisis. And then there is the Gen Z, he calls the artist generation. They are fantastic creators, but they them as the silent generation. They tend to be very back and reserved, where their millennial forebears are loud and in charge. So, yes, that's kind of the background of what he's working through. This talk is mostly about Xers, because Xers end up being they end up being like the manager class through the crisis. So in the crisis, you'll have a small number of boomers, and I'm gonna have to keep this short. You have a small number of boomers who are not the boomers that were popular, for lack of a better term, back in like the 60s and 70s. These are the rebels of that era. The guys who looked at what the majority of the boomers were doing and said, "Y'all are fucked." These guys will step up and they will provide kind of an ideological basis for why we should be doing what we're doing, but there's not enough of them to lead. The Xers fill out the management ranks. They're the ones who take that sort of ideological vision and decide how to do it. And later on in the show, we're going to get into some of why what you're seeing now is going on in terms of Trump and his how his cabinet's behaving. By the way, his cabinet is almost purely Xer. Okay. In fact, I don't think there's a non-Xer in there. If there is, it'll be a millennial. There are no boomers in Trump's cabinet. And that's going to matter bigly, to use a Trump word, to the future. Okay. So yeah. Right now we're just setting up a few threads. You guys, you guys know our show. You're going to have to track stuff with us for a while. And for now, I'll just keep going. This is going to run for another 5 minutes, although I'll probably stop it somewhere in the next 2 minutes because there's another point he brings up that's key to what's going on.
Has actually led this generation to be very much of a contrarian generation, individualistic generation. I'm only getting ahead by being different from my peers. So they've resisted big brands. They've resisted going along with the crowd. They've been very good contrarian investors. You know, they're really good on those short funds. You know what I mean? Yeah, I'm going to short that. I'm going to, I'm going to go negative on this or that.
A lot of doomers. Yeah.
Millennials are completely different. So millennials, we got all band together.
Mr. Wonderful here. My friend Howard Marks is the co-founder of Activision, the gaming giant.
And they're all investing in target date funds.
Yeah. But that
They're
both
all investing in the S&P 500. But here's the difference. Gen Xers felt that the only way they could survive is by taking their life rafts and sailing in different directions, because the whole thing was going to sink. Millennials are roping all of their lifeboats together because they realize if the entire S&P goes down, someone's got to save them. You know what I mean? It's actually
okay. So he says something here that's key. Now, this is a finance channel, and so he's talking about finance. He currently works for Hedgeye. If you guys know what they do, that's great. But notice how he defined the two generations. The Xers took their life rafts and sailed in different directions. That was how they were going to survive. But the millennials are lashing all of their life rafts together. Okay. This is a key point of the coming crisis. Now, I'm not going to give it away because he actually makes a point right at the end of this video that ties all of this up. But that matters. The Xers focus on save yourself. And you see that in their messaging. This is the doomerism and the enjoy the declinism. Okay. And, we've talked about this before and why I don't think that message has much more time left to function is because the millennials are coming into their own and they largely reject that kind of messaging. He talks about something called TDFs, target date funds. And basically what it is you take the whole S&P 500, you add some bonds and gold into it. And as time rolls on, you move progressively out of stocks and into bonds. And so what the millennials are saying is we want to own all of it so that if anything bad happens, we will have to collectively rescue ourselves. We are all in this together. is kind of how the millennial ethos works. Okay. The Xer ethos is literally the exact opposite of that. It's the only way to save myself is to run away from anyone else who might compete with me. I have to be unique. I have to be, different. And you can see that in some of how the Red Pill talks. And I am not making value judgments on any of this. I am merely pointing out that people can operate in their generational mode without even realizing that's what they're doing. And when they don't see that, they don't understand why the generation that comes after them looks at them and goes, "What the fuck is wrong with you?"
So, are you implying that the Red Pill is really run by Xers who say, save yourself? Money, muscles, game, just outcompete the other guys, don't band together. Yeah, there's big problems out there, but you can, through your individualism, come through this.
Yes,
It's also more Nietzschean. It's also more Nietzschean from the, especially from the boomers, inherited from the boomers.
Well, so the boomers used Nietzscheanism as a lever, but if you look at where Nietzsche was born into a nomad set, just like an Xer would be today. Okay.
So on the red pill, are there any boomers in the Red Pill?
There are. And you don't see them saying these kinds of things.
I mean, because I was born in 62. So by this measure, I'd be an Xer. And I'm one of the oldest Xers. But there's not that many people in the Red Pill older than me.
As I said, there's a couple. So the thing to understand about these generations is it's not a hard cut. It's not like 1961.
No, it's not. Because I'd still think a little bit like a boomer. And you accused me of that. And it's all in good fun. So I'm fine with it.
Right. So, it's like technically Nick and I are what they call Zennials. We are close enough to be close enough that we share some tendencies of Xers and millennials. So, if we go a little bit doomer sometimes, now you guys know why. Nick and I can even have some of those because we're old enough that we qualify. We are still technically millennials, but anyway. So the kind of one of the interesting things about all of this is that individualism is going to be key to resolving the crisis, but not in the way you think. And the other thing to know is that, and he says this later, we are not in the crisis yet. And I can't remember if I actually got this point in the clips that I have, so I'm just going to come out and say it. Neil Howe talks in all of their books about these on the road to crisis, you get what he calls regeneracies. Someone will come in and they will fix a few things. Okay. He actually, in The Fourth Turning Is Here, cited the first Trump presidency as the first regeneracy of the crisis period. Okay. In this one, he kind of hints that maybe some of the stuff that Trump is doing in his current presidency is the second regeneracy. There are always two. There could be three regeneracies, and he kind of hedges his bets and say there could be more. But what's interesting about that is people come in, this person comes in and they fix some things, but none of it resolves the core issue. Okay.
That's kind of what we've been talking about.
Yes, exactly.
A lot.
Right. And so because here's the thing. The things that they resolve are not the core issue, they're either things that never mattered, or they are issues that have been festering for a long time. So, for example, the Doomers will love to tell you about how the world is going to end and how World War III is coming to us. Okay. Right? I'm sure you guys have all heard this rhetoric out there on the YouTubeverse. World War III is coming, and my opinion of that is this is actually fighting the last war, which is a military idea that your military is built to fight the last war. Well, we as a population are looking for the next world war because that's the last battle we fought. But let's take a quick rundown of all the flashpoints currently going in the world. Obviously, we have Ukraine and Russia. That war is a direct result of the end of the last crisis, World War II. Okay? And everyone says, oh, well, no, it has to do with the breakup of the Soviet Union. Well, yeah. But if it wasn't for World War II, then the Soviets would not have lost the millions of men that they did. Okay? And if I were to pull up the demographic chart for Russia, which I don't have loaded, but you would see these pinch points every 20 years where the number of people shrinks significantly in that generational pocket. That's because of the number of men that were killed by Russia fighting in World War II. That still echoes today, to the point now where Russia itself does not have enough men to guard its borders as they exist today. They need to get to the Carpathian Mountains, which are on the other side of Ukraine. So they're invading Ukraine.
Ukraine is a product of World War II.
Yes.
It includes former parts of Poland, Hungary, and Romania. And, well, the Donbass has been part of Russia in the past.
Yep.
So those borders, well, arbitrary, maybe but they were established in World War II.
Correct.
So, yeah, okay. Those old borders are kind of being resettled. So, or redefined. Don't be surprised if Poland in the next 2, 3, 5 years doesn't vie for a bit of the territory they lost, and maybe Hungary and Romania. It's not out of the realm of possibilities.
Yeah, I wouldn't rank it as very high, and I'll get it to why, because the why applies to all three of these scenarios equally. So the Ukraine war, absolutely a product of World War II. Okay. We've talked about the Ukraine war at length in a prior video. It's linked down below. The next war, obviously, this one's going to be fun because it's in the news, so I'm just going to try and get through this. Israel, Iran. Now, as with Ukraine, Russia, I also do have access to on-the-ground information, which means I do have to be circumspect about what I talk about and what I know publicly. I did talk with Steve and Nick beforehand about this. However, the key point to understand is that the Iranian state, as you know it today, is a product of a map redraw that was done of the Middle East after the end of World War II. It's part of how Israel got its statehood in that same process. Okay. And Iran actually is not a historically Islamic nation. Their religions go back long before Islam was a thing. And Iran has actually always been a more natural ally of the United States than it has been an enemy. It's an enemy because the Islamic regime decided because because we supported the regime of the Shah beforehand, that we must be its enemy. Okay, that is the history of it. I'm sure you guys have heard other things on the internet, but can I say that? Not, I can't say that without permission, but I know people who were there for the end. So, and
I want to point something out.
go ahead.
Iranians are not Arabs.
Correct, they're Persian.
Hey, for you Americans who think they're Islam, they're Arabs. No, they're Persian.
Yes.
And okay, when Islam came through, it was a bloody time, and they made everyone speak Arabic, just like when the Spanish and the Portuguese conquered South America. They converted everybody to the language. But you know what? The Iranians do not speak Arabic. They kept their language, Persian.
Correct. Yes.
That's a big thing. So they're not your run-of-the-mill Muslims. They are different. Because they could not be subdued in the same way that a lot of the other civilizations or cultures could. They kept a lot of independence in their conversion to Islam.
Go ahead, Nick.
And they've been Islamic since the early 7th century AD. So it does have a long history there for them. Christianity has been there a long time, though it's suffered much persecution with the rise of Islam. Zoroastrianism, of course, was the more ancient religion, predominant religion before Islam came onto the scene in Persia.
And by a lot. So it was what, the 7th century for Islam? You have to go back. The Persian religious identity goes back almost 3,000 years, so almost twice as long as Islam. And the wars of conversion, Steve, we're talking about, I don't know if it's possible to convey just how bloody those things were. Like, and it was so bad that they couldn't actually fully convert them. Zoroastrianism is still a valid, allowable religion in Iran today. And in fact, many people are converting to Zoroastrianism so that they do not have to be part of the Islamic regime. And the other thing to remember about Iran, and this is going to become important in the future, is there are still many people alive today who remember the life under the Shah versus life under the Islamic regime. So this is one to be very careful of, and I'm not going to try and make a whole lot of grand predictions about what's going to happen with Iran, because there's still much story to be written there. But do not assume that the Islamic regime has an iron grip on the people.
Well, we have to remember, Eastern Roman Empire was in Constantinople. That's Orthodox Christian Church. Turkey was a Christian country. Syria was pretty much Christianized. There had to be a lot of Christians in Iran.
Yep.
When the
Israel
Muslims
was a Christian country.
Nick.
Israel was a Christian country.
That was Palestine then, right?
Well, which time?
Yeah.
So, I mean, Christianity actually has older roots than Islam in that area of the world. They have gone through a lot of wars and religion changes. And we're kind of seeing a lot of this revisiting of some of those historical periods of turmoil. So, I mean, yeah, it's not in their a person's memory, but it's in the cultural memory. Because
Yeah,
Persia is a what 2,000-3,000-year-old civilization.
3,000. They're 3,000-year-old culture. It's that culture is firmly established, and it's a mountain people's culture. So if you want an analog that you guys might understand a little better, the Scottish are also a mountain people culture, and they can be very prickly and rough, and they don't change their ways easily. Persians can be a lot like that. So uh, the
Yeah,
interest.
plus get the Scottish and Dutch together. It's not a good mix. Sorry.
So no, it's cool. It's cool. Um, but with the Iran-Israel war, the thing here to understand is that it too is a product of the resolution of the third crisis, World War II. Now, those are the two ongoing hotspots, and there is one more that has been in the news quite a bit, and that is, of course, China versus Taiwan. But here's the thing to understand about China versus Taiwan. China was fighting a civil war before World War II officially broke out. It was also fighting a civil war. It was also at the same time fighting a war against the Japanese. The Civil War occurred because there was disagreements about how to deal with the Japanese, the nationalists versus the communists. They put their civil war on pause for World War II and the Japanese invasion, kind of. And then after World War II ends, they go back to it. And the result, of course, is the nationalist exile to Taiwan. So that is also a product of World War II. Now, notice how the resolutions to these conflicts appear to be happening right now. Ukraine, Russia is going to come to some kind of resolution at this point. We don't know what that will be, but it will resolve one way or the other. Okay. Israel, Iran. We're not as far down the process as Ukraine, Russia, but there does appear to be the beginnings of finality. I can say this because he posted it publicly. The son of the Shah of Iran, the guy's name is Reza Pahlavi. He has come out and publicly stated his plan for what to do after the collapse of the Iranian regime. He has a whole thing, but he opens his plan with, "I will not be returning as the king." Shah just means king in Persian. So he has a plan. It is up to the Iranians to decide if they prefer his plan to the Islamic regime's plan of getting the shit bombed out of them by Israel, which Israel is doing right now. In fact, Israel completely owns the skies over Iran. Israel's air defense networks have been shredded, which is bad news for China because Israel's air defense networks are based on Chinese technology. Just as a fun little note.
Israel's or Iran's?
So, hi, Iran's. Israel's are based on
That's
US
right.
tech.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, you got me.
You're saying
No,
Iran's network has been
I
shredded.
didn't want to get you. I wanted to correct you for our.
I know,
for our
you caught me.
audience, so.
So you caught me. You stopped me from
They both
making a
start with
mistake.
I.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
both
Yes,
start-
they do.
yeah.
Interestingly enough, we now have combat data on the F-35, and the F-35 can basically
Oh, nice.
walk into Chinese air defense and own it. So that's what we learned. And the Chinese, if they're not shitting their pants, they need to be, because this has implications for their conflict that they want to do. If we can really shred them that efficiently, then the conflict looks a lot worse. Now, geopolitically, China has even more problems from a collapse of the Iranian regime. Namely, they lose their primary energy source. So I was talking about with Steve with this offline earlier this week. There is a situation where if Reza Pahlavi is returned to Iran, he currently lives in exile right now in the United States. I won't say where. Reza Pahlavi would be very U.S. friendly. He would not be China friendly. So there is a path here to China just losing its energy, which means that they may, and this is a may. Russia's still at play here, and there's other ways they could do this, but China may lose the ability to even consider a war with Taiwan at all. The interesting thing about this
Timetable.
is
Timetables.
Exactly, Nick. It depends on how these things play out. We're just going to have to watch on that. But the interesting thing about all three of these is that they are resolutions to problems that started in the third crisis. They are not the fourth crisis. Okay? The fourth crisis is still out there.
There's, as long as we're talking about historical things, Russia and China have not always been friends. They've had some really strange things. And during, I think at the end of World War II, Russia acquired a bunch of territory up in the northeast corner. So the northeast portion of China no longer has access to the sea. It's up around the area of North Korea. So, I mean, China and Russia always had border clashes up in that region there. It's been quiet for a lot of years, but they still have long memories. So could those come up again? Yeah, maybe. Don't be surprised if it does.
Exactly. Don't be surprised. That's why we say things as we say them on this show. Well, it might be this. Don't be surprised if that weird thing happens. Right now, however, Putin is President Xi's only hope for food and energy. So I'm not counting on this happening, because particularly if the Iranian regime falls, Putin is Xi's only hope. So,
and yeah, they'll be friends because China needs Russia's energy. Okay, so they have incentive to cooperate.
But I might be jumping the gun here.
For 10, 20 years. At some point, maybe it's not in their best interest to cooperate.
Go ahead, Nick.
And things change.
I might be jumping the gun here, but don't they have negative energy prices right now in China?
Yeah. They did a couple weeks ago. Yeah, they were paying people to take energy. Oh no, China's economy is in a depression. Yeah. The CCP's numbers say they're not. The CCP's numbers are.
Oh, they've been lying about numbers a lot.
They're complete fabrications. The CCP a few weeks ago did come out and say that the census overcount may be somewhere between. Now they're saying between 100 to 300 million. So,
no, we talked about that, didn't we?
We have talked about that in the past. That video's linked down below too. And we in one of our videos we mentioned that China's population could be as low as 800 million. I now see that as more likely than even when we did that video. So 800 million is still a lot of people.
Oh, it was like that time we did that early on. I did a demographics episode. Then they corrected it.
Yes.
It showed where it was even worse than we thought.
Right. Yeah. I think when we did that one, they were like, oh, it's 100 to 150. And now they're like, well, it's 100 to 300. And the corrections only ever seem to go down for China. They don't seem to go up. And there's good reasons for that. So there's a question here as to whether or not China will even be able to pull off a war with Taiwan. You're talking about crossing 90 miles of open ocean, which is some of the most trafficked water in the world. I'm just not sure how much surprise you can get out of this. We also did an episode that's linked in the description. It's called Morality Bubbles, and we talked about something called preference falsification bubbles. And the interesting thing with these countries is all of them are very steeped in very, very active in preference falsification bubble creation and maintenance. If you guys hear when you hear the word Zionist, the Iranian preference bots will come in and they will boost your post if you use that on Twitter. The Russians have a very different version of that for can I say that? Those words. They do the gay transing version of that. The thing is, if those regimes fall, those botnets that boost those voices will fall with them. So do not be surprised if all of a sudden, as these regimes collapse, that there is a vacuum in the voices that you are used to hearing confirm your preferred worldview. Again, this is this is why I said up front what I said, and then now I have to say, okay, but don't be surprised if what you are used to hearing suddenly disappears. You have something to say, Nick?
Oh, you notice you could have seen this some with the recent election. I found out I had like a whole bunch of bots following me, and then I lost a whole bunch. I was like, oh, I guess there were bots and they're trying to feed me content.
Yes,
contradicting each other, but whatever.
The contradiction is the point of these things. So, yes.
See, we kind of deal with that. For instance, the whole thing on the China population, where we speculated that the China population could be a lot lower because of demographic things, lower birth rate, incentives to inflate it, and COVID. We had no data. We just speculated. Okay, and then we continue to watch, and here's another data point. Kind of says it's going in the direction of our speculation. We still don't know whether we're right or wrong. It was
correct,
merely an observation, and we do a lot of that. Yeah, this could be true. This is what I've heard. Don't be surprised if this is true. But even in the US, you're not operating on good, trustworthy data. There is a lot of propaganda here in the media and in government narratives and in everything. Yeah, we have better data, but don't assume what you're being told is 100% correct. We're even hearing it now. Like AI is becoming so accurate and good at creating video. Even some of this video of devastation in some of these wars, it may not be real. It might be AI. Now, I've heard someone say that. Do I know that? No, I don't. But don't be surprised if what you're told, even with what you see, isn't quite true.
Certainly does make finding good information a chore. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, the internet used to be kind of a check on the mainstream media. Now the internet's become the mainstream media and have all the problems of false narratives, especially with what you supposedly see again with all this AI crap.
Absolutely. We're going to have to figure that out. And I don't know what that looks like, but we will figure it out. All right. On to my next clip. This one runs for about 8 minutes. Don't know if we need to go all the way through it. But we're actually going to talk a little bit of trading terms. So excuse us if Steve and I geek out a little bit.
These new, secure, but still young institutions that nonetheless, you as leaders don't want to be too risky with them. You understand what risk is all about. I always say Generation X knows about risk better than any other generation. They were suckled on risk, right?
Duck and cover, man.
A lot of us are terrified at risk, right? I mean, that's the difference, right? But Dwight Eisenhower was a very risk-averse president, and I think very much in the style of his generation. He wanted to make sure the Soviets were in their place. He wanted to but he did not want to do anything adventurous. He did not want to start new wars. He wanted, right? And it worked. And over that period, America suddenly became more prosperous, and that we suddenly gathered momentum. But the next generation, the GI generation, as Jack Kennedy liked to say, they wanted to take longer strides, right? And they wanted a great society, as LBJ said. Those dreams of FDR had been put on hold by these lost generation presidents, who, let's face it, many of them were Republican. It was like Dwight Eisenhower. Yeah, we had to come to terms with Social Security, but that's it. Don't want to do it. You know what I mean? But no, this new generation wanted new things, right? It wanted a great society. It thought we could have guns and butter. We could fight wars in Southeast Asia and bring the final fruition of what FDR started, right? Another New Deal, and we could go to the moon, and you know what I mean. We could do lots of stuff, and maybe at the same time let kids explore their inner world. Oh yeah, that'll turn out just great.
What he's referring to there in letting kids explore their inner world is, of course, what creates the prophet generation known as the boomers.
Woodstock, Grateful Dead,
Yep.
LSD,
Yep.
marijuana. Is that what he's talking about?
Yes, that's what he's talking
Jimi
about.
Hendrix?
Exploring the mind, right? Because and the reason that the millennials want to do that is because the millennials had just been through hell, but they've been through an external hell. Right?
You mean the boomers? The boomers did that. They experimented.
No. So the boomers are born after the crisis. It's actually one of the universal features of boomers, and so they never experienced the crisis. They never experienced their world just falling apart. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So the millennials went through that. So the millennials say, "Oh no, we have to let our kids explore their inner selves because they were never allowed to."
Wait, you're saying the generation that fought in the World War II, you're calling them millennials, but they're just that sort of turning of the four.
Right. He would call them the hero archetype. I'm just inserting millennials because that's that's who we call them today.
Yes, we're going around the cycle again.
Right. So the greatest generation, the hero generation, they had just gone through hell, and they never had the opportunity to explore their inner world, so to speak. And so they tell themselves, well, we secured the world so that our children may explore their inner world. And that's kind of what he's talking about. If you see the subtitle there, it's the consolidation moment after the crisis. And that's just kind of what he's talking about.
Those boomers certainly did explore.
Nah. Well,
that was the time. Also, the sexual revolution.
Yes.
Okay, but let's say, look, Steve,
have you heard of free love?
Look,
does that sound like rampant promiscuity?
But the women never stopped since the boomer generation.
They toned it down.
I don't know.
For a while,
privately, you're right, Nick. But publicly, they toned it down.
Yeah, during the 80s and 90s, they toned it down.
Yeah, I don't know, but right now, sure, not toned down.
No, that's expected. And so we are in what they call the unraveling period, he calls it winter. So he uses it in the 4 seasons. We'd be in winter or the unraveling, and this is kind of where the boomers' parents are all dead right now. And what that means is that the boomer ethos is unchecked. And so the boomers will never step in to say, hey, wait a minute, daughter, whoring yourself out on OnlyFools is not such a good idea. Because they can't say that because that we need to let our children explore, and we need to let them be themselves, and free love, and these are all the things that I spent my life fighting for. It's not until we get to the Xers that you start to see a backlash against that. Okay. So the Xers actually do really backlash against it in terms of how they raise their children, but the Xers themselves participated in it because that's all they knew growing up. Generational cycles are this kind of weird, different trains on the same train track, leaving different stations at different times, right?
I agree with that because I experienced that. Now I've learned, and yeah, I would impose a lot more boundaries. But unfortunately, I'm divorced, and so my children were raised without a father. So they lack that as well.
As do many.
And you know what? I don't need sympathy or pity. I'm just pointing out a fact that a lot of those Xers got divorced, and the Xer men did not have the ability to or the access to actually impose some reasonable restraint on their children. And that's kind of showing up as how far off track things have gotten.
Yep. But this is normal for where we are. Things always end up here because they have to. And I'm going to continue this, and he does get into it. Although we're going to take a detour through risk taking here for a minute, because this is, again, we're setting something up here, guys.
So at Woodstock, you had helicopters ferrying bottled water and ferrying food to these kids. I mean, who knows? They may know something we don't know. You know what I mean?
Right.
There was no sense of caution in that generation when it came to big collective risk. Individually, they were very risk averse, I think, like millennials. And if history does have one lesson, it's that as we grow individually more risk averse, we often grow collectively more likely to take risks. And that's something very interesting to think about in the context of the fourth turning. Individually, we've become much more a society that wants to be sheltered. You know what I mean? We want safety nets. We want someone to look after us. Everyone talks about the Fed put, the Trump put on the market. Believe me, if we had another thing like if we had another crash like the GFC, I mean, we'd have Feds just start replacing everyone's paycheck, just like we did in COVID. I think actually the circuit breaker now for misery is set at a very light point. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and I do think, despite what Trump says about, and I think he's pretty smart to say it, I don't mind having a recession early in my presidency. I'll be like Ronald Reagan, be ruining America by the time it ends. That's just smart. I mean, that's what he should be saying, right? But nonetheless, I think that the collective backstop is big for us. And what I'm saying is that history suggests that when society feels that it's entering its more collective mood of not wanting to take individual risk vis-a-vis others, it's more likely to take collective risk, right? Our entire society risking going this way or that, to make sure that we become something new, something different, something safer as a group. And I see that as a historical pattern, by the way.
Where does individual financial risk taking fit into that? Because certainly one of the stories of the last 5 or 6 years has been the rise of sort of YOLO financial nihilism, certainly in the US. I don't want to speak elsewhere, but whether it's, the endemic nature of sports betting, poly market, massive amounts of leverage, crypto, none of that feels like anybody being risk averse to me. That feels like a lot of risk taking behavior at the individual level.
Hey everyone, big heads up, Paleo Valley's running a sale on all their meats.
that that's just entirely folks under the age of 30. I think that's a pretty broad trend that we've seen in investment markets and entertainment markets. How does that line up with that idea of the sort of increasing conservatism?
I actually don't think it's not just, I think it is people over 30 is my point. I think Gen Xers are setting the tone for that. But I also think there's a feeling among a lot of people, particularly by the time we got to the late teens, we got 5 or 6 years out of the Great Depression, the Great Recession, that everyone's playing with house money. The stock market is up so much. This is just paper money. I can play with it. I do see two big trends among millennials. One is, we talked about it earlier, target date funds and passive investing. That is not taking risks. That is making a very calculated judgment. I'm going to invest in the entire market, and that serves two purposes. First of all, this is very important among millennials. I'm not going to envy my buddies because they're going to be investing in the same thing I am. So, we either all go down together, which is okay.
It's community investing.
Yeah, well, it is kind of community investing. And this is why everyone's worrying, and I'm one of them. I've written about this subject a lot. I worry a lot about passive investing as basically disabling the role of active investing and actually serving what financial markets are supposed to do is actually provide a good estimate of the value of firms, right? And I think to some extent in the last couple of years, we've even seen the entire world begin to invest in America because of this whole passive craze that we've gone on.
Yeah, and my whole career's been there. So I agree with you. We've had all sorts of unintended consequences from passive investing.
But I do believe perversely, it's the fact that everyone sees more strength in all duplicating each other. I mean, that's the weird thing about having, government as a backstop. I mean, that if, Apple or Nvidia or Microsoft go down by 30% or 40%, that, Fed Chairman Powell is going to have an emergency press conference, and he's going to talk about the 3-5 things we're going to do right now to correct this. But if you have if you're investing in some little company on the Russell 2000, he's not even going to notice you. Do you see what I mean? It's like federal emergency insurance,
Okay. There's a reason I wanted to dwell on that for a little bit. And we talked a bit about this at the beginning of the show. But there's this idea that, particularly in the red pill space, that it's every man for himself. And that messaging is going to play fantastically with Xers. And the millennials, if they hear you, they're going to be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? If the red pill is to survive the crisis, which is in the future, it is not yet. And we can talk about what that crisis might look like. In fact, I would like to. The crisis, he said something very, very key in this clip as well. And what he said is the society is going to collectively decide to risk going this way or that way. And here's the thing. The Xers are the second smallest generation. They are the smallest voting generation. Gen Z is probably smaller, but they don't vote yet as a unified generation because they're not done being born yet. So obviously not all of them can vote. The Xers have never and will never be able to dominate the direction of the country. And this plays into their fatalistic nihilism quite well. But if you want to reach younger men, and this is men under the age of, we'll say 40. It's 43, I think, this year. But if you want to reach men under that age, this whole every man for himself, just be a better man, just you have to build yourself up. All of that is going away. They're not interested in it. You can see it. He's talking about how they invest. These people are putting their money, hard-earned cash, such as it is. And remember, we've done episodes that show that they don't have a whole lot of money to put into the stock market. So they are taking their money, their most prized assets, and putting them in funds that basically say, well, we either go up together or we go down together, but whichever way we're going, we're all going together.
That would include index funds, right?
Correct. Yes.
So I'm not going to pick winners and losers. I'm just going to ride the trend.
Correct.
So as this risk thing, let's bring it back to the red pill. There are 3 areas of the red, well, maybe more than that, but 3 areas. You got the men's rights, MRAs. You got the pickup artists or money muscles game, which, that's kind of the mainstream red pill. And then you have the MGTOW, men going their own way. So this middle group, self-improvement, you can take on the risks. And as an individual, you can beat the odds more to get women than to get married, because they're saying don't get married because the odds are bad there. But you can still be a winner individually.
Mm-hmm.
But the growing group seems to be the MGTOW, men going their own way, saying, risk, it's just not worth it. I'm going over here. I'm just getting out. I'm not taking the risk. I'm going to go this way with all the other guys. So this whole red pill self-improvement thing doesn't seem to be working, and it's not growing. The walking away, guys, that movement is growing. You see it demographically. Those guys are not here in the red pill, but if you hear the women complaining, where are all the men? What are the men doing? Acting collectively.
Well, we've actually touched on this as the solution to the problem that men face. I think we've talked about this in numerous different episodes. And he's actually just very succinctly describing what's going on. The millennials are far more risk averse individually. Marriage and relationships are always and everywhere an individual decision. So as a group that is not as interested in risk, that is highly disinterested in high risk scenarios, they are collectively saying, nah, we're just not even going to bother with women.
Let me take it one step further. Even having sex, a one-night stand, a fling, a long-term relationship, having sex is a risk. It's an individual risk. So what's the solution?
Just don't.
Not going to do that.
And, to the women, I would have to say, look, you brought this on yourselves. There is no going back. The millennials are not having kids at the rates that we need them to have kids at. Yeah, there's still men lining up to put their hands in that particular wood chipper. I mean, you still see marriages, you still see having kids, you still see kids around, and there's a lot of millennials. Biggest generation in the country right now is millennials. So even if the percentages are down, the actual numbers are still going to be higher than the Xers were ever able to do. So it's not like it's not happening, but the thing that the Xers just find vexing and inscrutable about millennials is exactly their risk aversion. To an Xer, this risk would be okay. By the way, Nick says he's having lag in his connection. He is at he is back to his remote distance work there. So just wanted to let you guys know that he might be in and out. So the Xers are looking at what the millennials are doing, and they're going, I can't believe that you guys think that this is going to work. Now, here's the thing. It actually will work, and it is probably the only effective solution, because you have a problem of that's collectively female. You are not going to solve the female crisis individually. It's nonsense.
But I see this in my job as a truck driver. There's just not a lot of younger men, millennials, coming in. Because I want you to think about this. Driving a big ass truck. It's heavy. You got a 53-foot trailer behind you. You're out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, and there's bad weather wherever you live in the country. And you just have to deal with it. Ooh, that's scary. That sounds risky. That sounds dangerous. So they don't want to do it.
So the reason that we've been, there's Nick going in and out. The reason that I wanted to bring up the risk aversion is because this is expected. It is, as the crisis is coming at us, we are moving towards a more collectively risk-taking mindset, combined with a collective or an individually less risk-taking mindset. And so we spent a bunch of time on history, we spent a bunch of time on the current wars, but if the three wars are resolving themselves now and the crisis is in the future, what is the crisis? And I think, we're talking about future history, so it's time to start. We spent an hour and 10 minutes or so going over the sort of baseline that we're operating from to construct our vision of the future. So here we go. Again, I was talking with my dad, and we noticed a pattern in U.S. history. Our first major crisis was the Revolutionary War. That was a war against a foreign power. Yes, I understand that it was also a civil war, but it was a war of remote. There was an occupying force from a country that was 3,000 miles away, and they had to, it was a war fought against a foreign power. Then you get to the Civil War. That's pretty much a domestic crisis. That's one country splits into two, has a big old fight, and then they resolve it. Okay, World War II. That is a foreign war. Okay? So I would say that the balance of probabilities suggests that the next crisis will be a domestic crisis. Now, I don't think that the female problems are the crisis point. I think that is an outgrowth of what was done to us, particularly in the last turning, if you will, the last cycle. But sorry, I'm reading through my notes here, and I have lots of them. part of what I think is happening is with this model is that you're kind of fighting the last war, right? So when an army goes to war, it was built for the last war it fought, not the war it's currently fighting. They have to retool the army, and then they can actually prosecute that war. So I think that's some of what's going on right now is everyone's looking for World War III, but the data says that World War III is going to be a fizzle. Well, that makes internal crises much more likely. And boy, are we sitting on some, aren't we? I see, Steve, you have something you want to say.
Well, these world kerfuffles will continue, and there will be new ones. For instance, one that I just recently heard about is Greece versus Turkey.
Oh man, that one's been going a long time.
Yeah, it's about ready to flare up. Because remember, Cyprus is half and half. And those two people or groups do not like each other, even though they're both members of NATO. So, okay, that one could flare up. We're in a period where these old grudges and feuds just happen again. So, is the U.S. going to get involved in Greece versus Turkey? Probably not much.
Well,
it's going to happen, but we're going to be dealing with our own crap here.
Well, and these
have a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, these are all very small dust-ups. Iran, Israel. I mean, I get that it has global impacts because of oil, but I was showing Steve a map earlier, and you guys could do this as an exercise. Go look at Iran and Israel on a map. It is not going to ever be anything than an air war because you have to invade two other countries to get there. So, neither side's going to do that. And air wars are typically non-decisive. You can bomb the shit out of stuff, but you can't really control the population unless the population itself decides it wants to mobilize and change their circumstances. Again, these are things that we are pointing out that could happen. We are not saying they will. But there's an interesting thing in terms of the United States specifically that came out of the third crisis, and that was this ethos of we cannot allow this to happen again, and this is racism on an industrial scale, specifically the kind that generates. And I can't continue with that, but what the Germans were doing in that war. Now, I understand that there's all sorts of disagreements about what exactly they were doing. That's not the debate I'm trying to have here. During the third crisis, the country came together and decided collectively that we will make sure that never happens again. And that ethos carried with us throughout the entire cycle. Now you can say, oh, well, but it's gotten perverted. Well, yeah, it has. The greatest generation or the hero generation before would have looked in dismay at how racism has been used today. But they would understand the roots of it. And they did understand the roots of it. My grandparents were of that generation. I've talked to them. If you explain it to them, they do kind of get it because they understand that they really did fight a war to end that. But the prophet generation, the boomers, took it, and they took it in a completely different direction. And what we see is this ethos became so important to them that not just racism bad, but now we must mix races. Now we must import all the races into the United States because that is the only way to prevent this from happening again. Okay.
Will that be successful?
No.
And you don't even know who you are.
Correct, Nick.
You
Which
lose your heritage. You lose your identity. And
They've tried to
no,
make us
it's
all
demoralization.
the same,
It's a form of it.
but yet there are still major cultural differences between the way, well, I'll just say it, the way the blacks live and the way the whites live. And we coexist. But you know what? Even under the previous order, they coexisted. But yet the differences have not been erased. Okay, we see that everywhere. I mean, we're seeing that in Russia, Ukraine. The differences were never erased. They reared their head again. So how are they going to rear their head? I don't know. I'm not predicting any racial strife. I'm just saying none of this stuff ever really goes away. It changes. You never know what's going to happen.
Well,
and I'm not advocating anything happening.
The interesting thing to me is that particularly if these wars don't turn into a world war that the United States has to get involved in, and the country decides collectively that it needs to be concerned about this, and remember what he said earlier on. He said, "Oh yeah, they set aside all the work of FDR." The ex-president set aside the work of FDR so that they could solve the crisis and rebuild the country, and the millennials wanted to get back to that. Okay, this could happen again here. Okay, except
hey, what about those LA riots? I think this is contrived, but and wasn't a natural occurrence. But what were those national flags that were flown on the side
Mexican.
of the? Oh yeah, it was Mexican. So again, somebody was trying to inflame a racial group against the U.S. So it was a racial issue. The Floyd riots in Minneapolis. Was that a racial thing? Uh-huh. No,
so
I don't want any of that. Come on, let's just all get along. But doesn't seem to work that way.
Well, to summarize Steve's point is there's this entire multi-generational effort to prevent that level of racism from ever happening again, and it has created that level of racism, sadly. So I am not approving of it, but I can see a situation where the quote unquote crisis point of the United States is not a civil war over the whatever the differences were, and we can argue about that till the cows come home back in the 1860s, but it becomes a sort of war that is fought between ethno-political groups is kind of how I want to say this, because and here's the thing. So I talked about the regeneracies that Neil Howe describes. The regeneracies always fix things that are not the core issue. And what I find fascinating watching what's going on is that Trump is having significant successes in lots of places, but he's not having success on immigration. He is constantly being blocked by, this judiciary or that NGO or or whatnot. The country right now is having a great fight over the future of immigration, specifically, and Trump can't win there. The reason I say that's interesting is because that seems to be where the battle lines, air quotes, are being drawn, is over this issue. I could be wrong, but Trump has had pretty significant successes outside of this one issue. I mean, we can argue about what's going on with the different wars and his foreign policy, and we can argue about what's going on with Doge and how successful they've been, but it does look like his big, beautiful bill is going to eventually get through, which will actually significantly re-architect a large number of programs that the liberals claim they care about, like Social Security and all of that. But he just can't seem to win on immigration. And I tie that back to the entire third crisis and post crisis view of we cannot allow this to happen again. They cannot. They view Trump's views on immigration as an existential threat to the entire project of the past 80 years. I don't know, Steve, am I off base here?
I was just thinking, you mean we went through that whole civil rights thing and it settled, so we don't want to go through that again? Therefore, this immigration thing, it's like the third rail. You're not allowed to go there.
It feels that way.
Any sense?
It does kind of feel that way when you listen to the rhetoric. I mean, think about what the riots were. They were anti.
So the immigration thing is being colored as a racial issue.
Absolutely.
Not as an illegal, you came here without permission issue.
Mm-hmm.
Don't care what your skin color is. No, if you say that, you are racist.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So is it a racial issue? Well,
technically, no.
It doesn't have to be, but that's how the battle is being framed.
Yes, it absolutely is being framed that way. It technically, the issue is over the definitions of esoteric law definitions, but look at how those laws are being wielded against us. And the other interesting thing about this is the United States has never really had a big fight, for lack of a better term, over the idea of immigration. Everyone, look, for the first 100 years, we were just an immigrant country. Like, that was how we grew, and so then we started to put some limits on it. But then Hart-Celler gets passed in 1965. We put some limits on it, mostly during the Great Depression and the World War II era.
There have been local uprisings. Yeah, during the Great Depression, they did deport a lot of illegals.
Yes.
And I don't know exactly what period that happened, where the WAPs came in. That was a slang for Italians. You know what it stands for? Without papers.
I think was the Reconstruction era when they came in.
It's not it's slang. It turned derogatory. But I think it's just funny because, you know what? No one has any animosity towards Italians any longer. But they came here, a lot of them, illegally. A lot of, maybe, I don't know, some percentage, 25, 30%, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There was animosity towards them because they came here illegally, but nobody really cared until they were taking my job.
Well,
And so it was a local issue.
Well, and the thing is the United States was still growing at the time, so the problem tended to resolve itself over time. The United States is not growing anymore, and so there's not just a constant bubbling of new jobs for people to take. In fact, the whole world is not growing anymore. The demographic situation around the world is terrifying, but also this has happened before in human history and this will happen again. So that's a topic for a different video. The reason I say that is because when you look at the history of immigration in the United States, it's always been very loose and it's been always a political trading chip. But for the first time in US history, we are not growing at a rate where we can assimilate immigrants. And the big problem is that everyone, like, the core problem here is that we have imported so many so quick that they can't assimilate. So they don't assimilate. They basically create their own ghettos. And this was done at an industrial scale that was only possible recently. Airplanes and cargo ships and stuff like, and trains, right? Those were, it was hard to move lots of people very quickly in the way we can now. The estimates of the number of people that came in just in the 4 years of the Biden administration are something like 20 million. That's industrial scale immigration. And what ends up happening is they don't assimilate. And when they don't assimilate, that creates a massive friction point between them and what I am starting to see called on Twitter heritage Americans.
Yeah, well, previous immigrants came in. And you had that area of town called Little Italy. You had Chinatown. St. Paul had Frogtown. I think that's where the French were living. I don't know. You had slang terms because they all congregated together. Now, they had their own little economy, and eventually they just integrated. But a ghetto is no different than that. It's a cultural group of ethnically similar people that congregate together. Now, what makes it a ghetto? Well, the economic conditions. But they spoke their own languages. There was Swedetown, where all the Swedes came in. And, Chicago, Martin Luther came up there and protested. Where did he protest first? Well, it was where all the Lithuanians lived. So there's always been these ethnic enclaves. Don't expect it to be any different when these new groups come here. They're going to group together. They're going to speak their own language. And it's going to take them about a generation.
It's about 20 years. I was just going to say that.
Before their kids actually learn. They will not learn English. Their kids
Correct.
will.
Well, and that's the thing is we had 20 years where immigration was closed. And so all of those kids, you were talking about the Italians, they all integrated during the war. Okay. That period where we had closed immigration from 35 to 65 in Hart-Celler, roughly. 30-year period where we could take all of the immigrants we had taken in and assimilate them. And if we were allowed to close our borders for a similar amount of time and allow the immigration and the assimilation process to take place, we could probably make this work without a crisis. And this is why I say where the battle lines are being drawn is so important, is because we're not being allowed to do that. And this is how you get a crisis. You have two sides that cannot ideologically let go of whatever their thing is, and they come to blows over it. And I didn't clip it, but he talks about it in this video, where we are now at the point where there is very few people left alive who even remember and lived through the last crisis. If you were 20 years old in 1945, at the end of World War II, you are 100 years old today. Think about that for a second. One of my favorite places to go is Oshkosh. I'm a pilot, and every year they bring in veterans. They used to bring in a bunch of World War II veterans. Now they bring in Vietnam veterans because the World War II veterans won't survive the flight. I hate to say it that way, but like they're 100 years old. And there's very few of them left that lived through it to tell you what went, what was going on, how they fixed it, why it was important that they fixed it. And so now you have these boomers running amok thinking that they can just declare something is true, and it's true, and the other side will just have to deal with it. That's not how this works, and that's how you get a crisis. The last one fades from living memory. And that's where we are. I don't know that immigration is going to be the last one, or the next crisis. I do know it's something that the United States has never grappled with. I do know that the battle lines are being drawn over that issue. And look, it could all go away and it could be replaced with a new thing next week, right? Trump is moving very quick. His entire cabinet is Xers. And one of the, I didn't get this in the clip, but one of the benefits of Xers is that they will happily try something else. Their idea doesn't work. Okay, it didn't work. Next idea. And you're seeing that with how Trump is executing his policies.
I don't think it's going to be a battle between men and women.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Because think about this. If a bunch of women went downtown and started rioting, the men would just sit back and watch. Yeah, okay. Uh-huh. Not going there. Not engaging.
So
that's not going to work.
The Smoking Patriot in the chat, he says, a boiling point be in relation to AI and jobs. I mean, immigration is really about jobs too. The thing about AI is there's really nobody to be angry at, right? With immigration, I can point to another person and say, you're the problem. With AI, I'm pointing at a non-thinking machine that kind of that can kind of approximate a thinking machine. If you want it to go away, just stop using it. Frankly, there's other technical problems with it. Look up the dead internet theory, that kind of stuff. It's a boiling point, but it's the jobs factor that's the boiling point. And can I say this? Go look at. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. Meant companies cutting low and middle tier jobs in favor of AI. Okay. There's been some really cool research done on Twitter over in the H1B space that shows that these companies are not cutting jobs in favor of AI, as in artificial intelligence. They're cutting these jobs in favor of AI, as in abused Indians. Okay. They are applying for H1Bs at a record rate. They are moving jobs over to Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad as fast as they can build buildings. So, yeah, they're cutting jobs, but AI is more of a pretext than it is an actual reason. They are still hiring humans. They're just not hiring humans in the United States. So that would be how I see that. But the problem is, even that ends up looping back to the immigration problem. So, because it turns out that with AI is kind of a weird thing. AI does not make intelligent people smarter. It does not. But if the AI can improve the performance of a low IQ person, because the AI can actually make them look and function faster, well, then it is in the business's best interest to get that cheap low IQ person versus the expensive high IQ person. And I think that's what we're actually seeing on the basis of the data that I'm looking at, because they really are hiring in India at a rapid rate right now.
There's another thing that I observed. Okay, because my background is in the pipeline, crude oil pipelines. So these pipelines, well, the one I worked on was put in the 60s, late 60s. 30 years later, 30 years later, there were cracks. How did they get there? Gee. So they had to study it. Oh, as it turns out, it was the way the pipe was transported on the rail cars. The bouncing flexed the joint, started a minuscule crack, and then the pipeline operating, pumping different batches, pressure goes up and down and up and down. Then that's low cycle fatigue. And then over time, it would crack. Okay, so we had to address that and come up with a plan and, retest the pipeline and do all kinds of stuff. Cost a lot of money. Well, then, 20 years later, they start putting up wind turbines. Oh, these are great. I said, yeah, you don't know the problems yet. They're going to come up. Oh, what are the problems with wind turbines? Okay, 3 blades. Every time that top blade goes up, you have a twist on it, and then it comes down, and the pressure comes off, and it goes back up. You're flexing everything. Okay, causing problems. Oh, that tip of that blade is going really, really fast. So it hits raindrops. Oh, it's like hitting little bullets. Oh, you put it out in the ocean. Oh, there's salt spray. So you're deteriorating the coating of the blades, and they're deteriorating. Oh, shit. Oh, and then you got problems with the generators and all this. You create a whole bunch of problems. You had no idea. So now we're implementing AI. Will there be any unintended consequences and repercussions? Or is it going to work perfectly?
We're already seeing the unintended consequences.
In the past, any implementation of a new technology, there's a whole shit ton of things they didn't know and didn't get right. So it doesn't work perfectly. It creates a lot of jobs later. Sometimes they have to scrap what they put up or completely tear it down and put up something new or just abandon the whole thing. AI is not going to be perfect. And when you start trusting AI to make decisions, then it's a bad decision. And the shit hits the fan on a local basis. You're going to have to hire a lot of people to fix it. It'll be different jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm throwing this out there as a possibility, and I'm throwing it out there on. And you guys heard my argument that this appears to be the thing that no one seems to be able to fix. And I'm sure, you say, oh, well, we haven't been able to fix this. We haven't been able to fix that. Well, this is my final clip, and he's going to talk about conflict as the incubator of community. But he says some other things in there that you guys might find interesting, and then we'll talk about that, and then we'll wrap it up here. We're running long today, but we are working through some pretty dense material. So here we go.
Much of social science, and you know, and this was Max Weber, and this was Emil Durkheim, and this was even in America we had William Graham Sumner and many others, right? But their fundamental insight, and they were all focused, by the way, on community. This is the time these huge cities were growing throughout Europe and America, and everyone was losing community. So the fundamental subject of the great first generation of social scientists was, where does community come from? And I would say their common conclusion, but one of the axioms of social science, as Robert Putnam, you know, put it in his book Bowling Alone.
I am the best boss I've ever met, by far.
Is that conflict is the incubator of community. It happens every time, right? And the reason why these nation states are so powerful and embody community is that repeatedly in the entire modern era, these conflicts have always worked to the aggregation of power in the nation state. Where do you think the nation state came from? After the Renaissance, when America was divided up in all these little duchies and communes and everything, well, these nations, what they called the new monarchies, you know, coming out of the late 14th and 15th and early 16th century, these new monarchies, they built big armies, they conquered these duchies, they conquered these rebel nobles, they enlisted a greater bureaucracy, they were able to extend their tax take, they were able to give more peace, greater commerce, greater productivity, more revenue, bigger armies. I mean, you see where this is going.
Oh, yeah.
This is a positive cycle of nation building. And ultimately, of course, by the 19th century, nationalism was considered a right of every people, you know, by Woodrow Wilson. That's why we went to war, right? To allow every nation to have nation to have its own nation, right? Every cultural nation.
Well, and even the Marshall Plan was largely about respecting that belief system that Japan still had a right to be a country called Japan, etc.
We even were willing to extend the Marshall Plan to Eastern Europe. But Stalin, he nixed that idea. I don't know why, but just said, you know, and it was funny because all these Polish leaders and
Okay, so crisis is the incubator of community. Now, think back to what we were talking about earlier. The millennials are a group of communal risk takers because they have to be. Individually, they're not going to take risks much at all. But as the crisis comes down on them, they are left with no choice. But I'll take this off. They are left with no choice but to confront the crisis, and they have no other way to do it than as a community, than as a group. There is no Ubermensch champion who is going to stand up and solve all their problems for them. And part of the reason that we know we're not in the crisis yet is because people are treating Trump as kind of an Ubermensch by proxy. He is their champion. When you think of Eisenhower and you think of even FDR, the guys who won World War II, they didn't think that way at all. Eisenhower wanted to think that way, but he couldn't go out there and slay the dragon himself. And so he relied on the greatest generation's ability to create groups of their own accord, almost as if by magic, for lack of a better term, to solve the problem for him. Yeah, he managed it. I remember what I said, the Xers are the managerial class of the crisis. But the interesting thing about this is that what you're going to see is in the crisis, you're going to see all of the people who held themselves up as the savior, as the Ubermensch, they get run over. And in fact, they're going to get discarded. Because when you think about who the Ubermensch is, he represents a danger to the group. He is not predictable, not controllable, not and he's not concerned about the group welfare. Okay? He's not concerned about the welfare of the group. Go ahead.
Let's think about this on a really small scale.
Sure.
Like we're in medieval Europe. Barbarians over there. We're just trying to be peaceful farmers here and raise our family. But collectively, they're coming in and causing major problems, stealing our crops and killing our women and men. And how about we elect a leader and band together? And you know what? He can be our king. Just keep me safe. And yep, you can have a castle, and we will all contribute to building that castle as long as collectively, when the bad guys come in, we can run away and escape to your castle. And after we make our harvest, you know what? We can store our grain there. And you know what? We're going to need a little bit of an army to protect us certain times, but not all the time. Give us a place so we can survive. You know what? This works. Collectively, yeah, we can solve the problem.
And they did. And it worked. And then, as Neil Howe pointed out, the duchies turn into monarchies and they get bigger. And then the nation states get bigger. And now to the more modern iteration of the nation state that we have today. The crisis does always aggregate power to the group. And that line more than anything else really vexes the Xer, because it does mean that you're going to see things that look to you like communism. They are not. Tribalism would be a better word for it. This is people coming together saying we are under existential threat, and the only solution is to band together to solve the threat. Oh, by the way, I have to call this out because Tacticus dropped a funny in the chat. The Ubermiss is the boss bay iteration. So go ahead, Steve.
So are we going to see millennials band together and act together en masse? Or are we going to see local groups band together and collectively act to solve local problems? And then a bunch of those band together to make a bigger entity, and it will grow that way.
I see that as a distinction without difference. And the reason why is because the millennials will band together locally and around issues online, and they will be led by Xers at different management levels, and the group will form, because the only way to solve the crisis is to form the group. And you're actually starting to see the groups form already online, particularly right now, Twitter being kind of the center point for that activity. But it's like, you go on Twitter and there's the H1B group. There's the anti-China group. There's the Iran-Israel group. There's of course there's the Ukraine-Russia group, right? So they have not all unified because the crisis is not yet known. I threw out my prediction of what the crisis will be. I can be wrong because the crisis is not yet known. But once the crisis occurs, all of those other things kind of just fall away. And that is when the final unification of the tribe comes together to solve the big existential problem. The interesting thing about that is your outsiders, your individualists are actually going to be seen as subversive and dangerous to the group. Those people will be cast aside. Okay, and I want to make this point very clear, particularly to the red pill space that we operate in. This mentality that we have today in the red pill of every man for himself will be cast aside as dangerous, as reckless, subversive. You who are in the in group today will be in the out group tomorrow, because one of the things that happens in a crisis is we get to open up the rule book on everything and rewrite the rules on everything. And I'm kind of sad that Nick's having connection issues, because this is where I would love to pull him in and say, here's the only way a group can come together is with a shared morality. We've talked about this on prior episodes.
Wow.
But like, this is
goal,
why we're
and the
talking.
goal has to be good.
See if my connection cuts out.
Well, Nick, maybe if you turn off the video but not the sound, maybe you can talk, and I don't know, maybe that'll work. But so in order for the group to come together, there must be a shared morality, and the crisis will create the conditions to define that shared morality. And after the crisis, that shared morality does not go away for 40 years. The Xers will never live. The Xers will never live to see the next unraveling. That's kind of the truth of this whole thing. So, Xers, and I hate to say it, but it is as good as it is ever going to get for you today, because every day that we progress towards the crisis, more and more tribal group shared moralities will be appearing. And eventually, one day, they're all just going to coalesce, typically around the crisis, and they're going to say, this is our collective morality. That's why I brought up the third turnings. We cannot not allow this racism thing to happen again. That was theirs.
You outlined or mentioned a number of theme groups on Twitter. Okay, well, let's use those as a proxy of the groups that'll have to come together. I have a question for you. How much, what percentage of the makeup of those groups are women?
Oh my. Very, very small. The biggest percentage is going to be in the Ukraine-Russia group. And it's mostly because there's Ukrainian women out there who are going pro-Ukraine. It's like, okay, I get that. But that's about it.
You see the implications of that?
Oh, did anyone honestly think that women were going to solve the crisis this time?
Patriarchy is dead? It's always men coming together to solve the problems. And the percentage of women involved in any of these issues is actually single digits.
Low single digits.
They're just not interested. And they can't really hang when the guys get really into a debate and back and forth, and it just doesn't appeal to women to hang in those groups. Men, wow, okay, we're going to get into it. I'm going to debate. We're going to go at it. We're going to form a consensus. We're going to debate the issues. Yeah, okay, I might have to give a few points because you might be right, but I am seeking the truth, And, there's going to be a whole bunch of infighting amongst our group. And yeah, they're a little, people get butthurt from time to time. But you know what? The group survives and continues and grows.
Here's a comment for you, Steve. Another funny from Tacticus. If the crisis is a spider, a scorpion, etc., men will have to deal with it. I mean, it's funny, but there's a kernel of truth there too. Something prickly and bitey comes for you, and the women disappear, and the men have to deal with it. And it has always been this way, and it will always be this way in the future. Shu, I don't know if you're still around. I want to bring this up. Considering how unreliable people are, many individualistic behaviors are forced onto us. Yes, and that unreliability is a direct result of the lack of group cohesion. And the reason I want to bring this up now is I've actually been waiting on this comment, and I love Shu because he usually figures out where we're going way too quickly for us. Is because when these groups are formed, they have to discard the unreliable people. The group cannot tolerate somebody who is unreliable. And so you're going to wake up one day and those unreliable people are going to be bitching and moaning on the sidelines about how life didn't treat them fairly because they got kicked out of the group. And that's okay. But we're not there yet. In order for all that to happen, you have to get to the crisis and through the crisis. Particularly early on in the crisis, there is this period where where the group is cycling through leadership, trying to find somebody capable. And the first people they go to are the people that they knew the best from before the crisis. Now, the people from before the crisis who were the big names tend to be grifters, charlatans. Basically they came across as intelligent enough to handle it or strong enough mentally to handle it. But when you actually get to the crisis, they fall apart. The Civil War on the North was famous. Lincoln was firing generals every month, because he had a crisis of competence. And eventually towards the end, he gets to a stable of reliable generals, but he didn't start the war that way. So a large part of the crisis ends up being a purging process for the unreliable people. And I like that word. That's why I wanted to bring that up.
You cannot tolerate or accept the risk of having an unreliable, incompetent, unproductive person in your group. And if he's the leader, you absolutely cannot tolerate that. But you don't have to. Because if he's not a good leader, men will not follow him.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't worry about it, because as painful as the crisis always is, and as dark as it can look, December of 1942, this is a little anecdote that Neil Howe brings up in his book, The Fourth Turning is Here. In 1942, Bill Cosby sings White Christmas.
Bing Crosby.
Bing Crosby. Yeah, sorry. I knew it was a B Crosby. He sings White Christmas. And so this is December of 1942. And morale was so low that the U.S. Army leadership considered banning it from airplay on the concern that hearing this song about being home for winter and you're around the fire with snow falling and all of that would so thoroughly demoralize the men that they would lose the war right then and there. They chose not to ban it. They played it. It turns out that what actually happened was the men so badly wanted to get to that future that it remoralized the men, and they fought like hell. Okay. That's how dark the crisis gets. These are not fun times. And that's why the charlatans and the grifters and the people who you thought were going to lead you at the beginning fail, because they were expecting it to be, well, like the Battle of First Manassas for Nick. That's why people, they were getting up there and they were having picnics, right? Oh no, we lost Nick just in time for me to give him a shout out.
Yeah, and the leader oftentimes is not the man who says, pick me.
Yes, exactly.
Oftentimes he's the reluctant guy who says, please don't pick me.
Well, Robert Lee
But
did not.
everybody
Robert
knows
Lee,
him, and all men around him just kind of figuratively just say, no, you're the man. And they collectively push him, and he has enough masculinity to accept the job and say, okay, the people have selected me.
I
Demand
view Robert E. Lee as a almost perfect example of exactly what you're talking about. He didn't want to. I mean, he was a West Point grad, Virginia, but the men chose him. The men wanted to fight for him. And I mean, again, we're not litigating the Civil War here, although I'm sure Nick is just dying to jump in.
I miss Nick. He's going to have to get this thing
Yeah, he is.
cleared out, because he's, you know what? This stream is important to him because he likes the interaction. I mean, he likes to put his thoughts out here, and yeah, he's having a few problems where he's at right now. He'll get it figured out.
He will. He's a smart guy. Okay. Here's a good question from Mr. Dugan. What if the rules-based post-war order keeps the crisis just under control, just enough or long enough that there is no real resolution? Okay. Andrew, you're going to force me to go nerd on you here. So when Generations was originally written by Neil Howe and William Strauss in 1991, they originally thought that the crisis would occur in 2020 to 2023. But as time progressed, they realized that the generational cycle itself was extending itself. And ironically, it's due to technology. We now have the technology to keep people alive longer than we used to. And so the generational cycle is stretching. They now think that the crisis will occur sometime late 2020s, early 2030s. Personally, other data I'm looking at says 2029 is great, is a great flashpoint for that. But anyway, it is not possible to keep the crisis under control just long enough, because all you're doing is kicking the can down the road and making the crisis worse. The crisis will erupt. The guy in the book, The Generations, they trace this cycle all the way back to the War of the Roses in 15th century England, if I recall correctly. And people have since piggybacked on their work, and you can now trace this cycle all the way back to the Roman Empire era. And there's starting to be work done that suggests that maybe there's a super cycle, a 300-year super cycle. So you get a 300-year expansion, technological breakout, and then you get like a 300-year consolidation. But the 80 to 100-year cycle always occurs, and the crisis will always be there because the people who could control it are dying.
But what if we, like, as a country, come up with a big, beautiful bill that fixes things, borrow more money so we can get out of this current crisis? Is the problem solved?
Well, no. In fact, you said it, and I was thinking, oh, well, this is just like the debt, right? Yeah, you could take more debt, but you're just creating an unsolvable problem in the future. China has exploded their debt by 4,000% since the year 2000. So in 25 years, they've exploded their debt by 4,000%. China is now in a depression. You can only stave these things off so long before math catches up with you. And this is no different because
Like
finance
gravity.
well, yeah,
Free falling.
yeah. Finance is just an extension of human psychology. The cycle is just an extension of it's an expression of human psychology. So for the same reasons that the debt problem cannot be contained forever, the resolution or the crisis cannot be contained. So in many ways, here's but now I'm going to do a hypothetical because I've given my answer, but I'm going to say, let's say for the first time in human history, we do contain the crisis. We do circumvent it. Here's what happens. More of the same. Things just keep getting worse. Okay? More debt, more Fed, more feminism, more egalitarianism. Okay? All of it just continues to get worse until eventually the population itself dies out because we stop having kids, because why would you ever have kids in a system that just keeps on getting worse? Okay? So there's a saying in finance, the cure for high prices is high prices. Well,
wait a minute. This time it's different. Because eventually
somebody's a special snowflake.
Eventually the women who are not finding men are going to figure out it's that bad, and they're going to reform themselves.
Well, I mean, Isaiah 3 does turn to Isaiah 4. I mean, they do get desperate enough.
But that's
with
like the
reality
pain
crashing.
part. No, they're going to figure it out before they.
No, won't happen. They're not capable.
Well, humanity is not capable of figuring it out before the pain hits, and that's what I mean when I say this is an expression of human psychology. These cycles are that's all they are. So, look at some point. Let's say they contain what I think the crisis will be. They contain the immigration problem. Trump, we elect a very anti-immigration Senate and Congress, and they pass the laws, and the immigration problem is contained. Okay, great. Would you like to walk down the list of other potential problems there could be, starting with, as you noted, the Fed, right? Okay, you solve one crisis and there's just another one sitting there waiting, because what we're really talking about is, as a collective group, a nation, we have not dealt with our problems for 80 years. One of my notes here is the crisis is where the buildup of the last cycle's grifter and charlatan economy finally collapses under its own weight. That is the crisis.
So, expecting you to be able to manage this, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. Have you ever played that arcade game?
Yep. Right. And of course, the moles start coming up faster and faster until you, of course, lose. You always lose whack-a-mole. You always lose. The question is just, how far did you get before you lost? That's a good analogy, Steve. I like it.
I like it too. It's funny.
So, what I would say in relation to this, never in human history has there been a point where things collapsed and stayed collapsed. Okay. That's never happened in human history. And we know that because we're alive. We exist. If things collapsed and stayed collapsed, we wouldn't be alive having this conversation. Okay. So, Tacticus, all I have to say to the women is good luck and Godspeed with that. You know, and for Nick, the thing that and maybe this is a little sad for Nick. Just as there was a revival of morality and concern of morality. I'm not talking about the what the morality was, but there was a grand concern of over morality in the 1960s, the Cultural Revolution, the all of that stuff that happened. There will be a moral reckoning after the crisis, but it will be after the crisis, and it will not be immediately after the crisis. The moral reckoning occurs 20 years later, and it's only starting to occur. Woodstock was 69. That was 25 years later, and the moral reckoning starts about 25 to 30 years after the crisis, and it continues for 20 to 25 years. But it is always a backlash against the moral sins of the past cycle. So,
Well,
and
yeah,
Steve,
of course.
we talked about this, so you know where I'm going with it.
People have to exhaust all other possibilities before they eventually arrive at, damn, I guess we'll just have to go back to the historical moral choice, which is really what the church is taught. But they're going to go through every other imaginable possibility that's feasible before they get there.
Yeah, and the reason the moral backlash doesn't happen right away is because, particularly in the 2 decades immediately following the crisis, the shared morality is so strong and cohesive that there really is no need to. I was listening to my grandfather tell me a story about he was driving at night and he was coming up to a stop sign and he noticed a car just sitting there at the stop sign. This is shortly after World War II. And he's driving up to it, and then the guy goes. There's nobody else around, no other traffic. The guy could have just rolled right through the stop sign, but he didn't. Because the moral the shared morality that got that entire generation through the crisis was so strong, that shared community, that shared morality was so strong that even when no one would see him, he still followed the rules. And so there is no need for a moral awakening until later. And the moral awakening always has to do with the last cycle. Why was the sexual revolution so important? Well, look at the sexual repression of the last cycle. Okay. It's particularly tied to the Seneca Falls Convention on Women's Rights that was occurring during the last cycle and all of that. It got to start there. These things move through time, right? Well, if we're entering so we are if the supercycle theory is true, and as I said, we don't have great data on this, so kind of take it for what it is, guys. If we are moving away from a breakout expansion period that would have started with late Enlightenment, early Industrial Revolution, and lasted for about 300 years, then we are headed into a period of consolidation that could last 200 to 300 years, where we don't lose access to technology, but things don't improve significantly. Like the improvements are very iterative. There's no fantastic new stuff.
Let's bring it to men and women.
I already know where Steve's going with this.
Think we're at peak female liberation now.
Mm-hmm.
And we got here, and it wasn't this bad 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever. So the pendulum is swung to peak female liberation. Or maybe we got further to go. I don't know. Just think historically, the pendulum is going to swing back the other way. And unfortunately, my observations of history and physics and stuff, however far away from the mean it goes on one side, typically goes as far on the other side. I don't relish that thought, but I don't know. I've not seen evidence that it's not true.
Well,
Uh,
Steve,
yeah.
okay, a pendulum, it has a momentum loss problem, right? So each swing is less than the
Right.
other one, right?
True enough, but this is a societal pendulum. So sometimes the swings of the pendulum can get larger.
Yeah, but
I mean,
here's what
I don't
here's
think.
what I would say.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this after we talked in the pre-show. Even if the pendulum does not swing as far the other way, we are still talking about devastating losses for women.
Oh yeah. I mean, forget about how far it's going to go, because that's going to be way the far in the future, long after I'm dead. But once it reaches this peak, okay, that's a peak. It slowly starts to turn and come back. You don't see the changes, but it gains speed as it goes. You know, this is probably not going to gain much speed and momentum in my lifetime, because we're talking like 100 to 300 year swing here. But just watch out, or watch for peak feminism.
Well, I think we may have actually turned. The red pill's going mainstream now. Lots of red pill guys have talked about that. Men have collectively checked out from women, and yeah, women are complaining about it on TikTok now. But can you imagine how desperate they're going to get during the crisis? I mean, we're talking about some pretty dark shit here. Okay, and here's the thing: if you're a guy who is like, no, I don't fuck with women, just in general, what are you going to demand of a woman to start fucking with her, just to start entertaining her? A lot. So, yeah. Well, here's the thing. That will ring out through the generations too, because your children are going to see that, and they're going to see how much you did, and they're going to go, wow, that was necessary. And this can go for a very long time, as Steve is saying, the other way. And it can get dark. Like I wouldn't treat my wife that way. And you guys, if you guys were listening in on Saturday last week, I did something that many feminists would consider, Nick, how do you say it? Abusive.
Everything is.
Yeah, well, I did something to her. Now, she doesn't consider it that way, but there are many feminists who would, right? The kind of thing that I did to her in 40 years from now, during the great awakening of the next cycle, she could find out that was the least worst thing that could have possibly happened to her.
Yeah, no, I have to tell our audience what a terrible thing you did.
Okay.
You deprived your wife of her telephone, her cell phone, smartphone for a day.
horrible, horrible thing that I have done.
It's the end of the world as we know it.
Right? Right?
Yes, man, are you an evil? You're just an evil man, controlling. I think they call that what, telephony abuse?
Telephony.
I don't
Okay.
know. We got to get the women on that. What kind of abuse is that?
I don't know. I can't work out the terms for that. I'm not a
Financial,
woman.
technically?
No, it's
Somehow
no.
it could be financial.
No, it's not financial.
No, it's not financial.
Okay. My
Paid the
wife.
bill.
And she edited it so I can put this up there. This is my wife, guys. This is what the term she came up for it. And there's probably some feminist out there who would use those terms. But what can I say? She's a woman. She thinks like them. So not terrible surprising there. But yeah, it's I hesitate to make predictions too far into the future. 40 years is about as far as I'm willing to go right now. I don't know exactly what the crisis will be, but I do know that there will be one at some point. Probably within the next 10 years, because the people who could stop it are dying, and eventually they'll all be dead. So, okay, then something will happen. As I said, it could come through, and immigration is not the thing. It's an example. For the purposes of this evening, it is an example of something where you can see how the battle lines are drawn around that thing. So,
well, you can't predict events.
No.
You can predict trends.
Yeah, actually, yes.
You cannot predict the timing of trends or when you've reached peak absurdity and it's going to reverse.
Correct.
You can render your opinion on that and what the next trend is going to be, but you're not really predicting any events and occurrences or anything like that. Just saying, people, watch out for this. This is likely what's going to happen at some point.
Yeah. And this episode is one in a long line of ones that we've been doing. We've talked a lot about the history of how we got here in prior episodes. Part of the reason that I'm so big on this concept of shared or group morality is because I view it as an inevitable result of what's coming. And so if I get into an Xer's face on this, it's not because I think their ideas are bad. It's because I'm looking at the future going, this idea has no utility to the future. Okay. I don't think you're a bad person. I think your ideas are bad. And on this channel, we have a saying, a part of our deal is that we do not attack men. We do not attack people. We are not interested in interpersonal drama. But what that does mean is that your ideas are absolutely up for being shredded. We go after ideas with a vengeance here.
Hooray.
Can you guys
need more drama in my life?
Amen, brother.
We don't have to do that. If we don't do that, reality will shred your ideas.
Yeah. True enough that. Well, guys, that's what I have for this evening. This has been a fun one for me. I feel like I've been studying for this one for 20 years. My dad would tell you he's been trying to teach me this stuff for longer than that. My dad was the one who introduced me to Neil Howe's work and the concepts. He actually uses this in his business, and it has allowed him and thus his family to navigate events with better than average results. Again, these are general ideas, right? Uh, but for example, I now modulate how I talk to millennials versus how I talk to boomers and Xers. It's, I can, it's one of the things he taught me how to do. And, this is a very father friendly channel, and Father's Day was this past Sunday. And so for me, part of this talk is, part of this topic today was, a bit of a send up to my dad. He is the one who taught me a lot of this. He got me, hooked on studying demographics and sociology and how, all this stuff plays together. So this one's been a lot of fun. Thank you, Dad, for putting this work in front of me and allowing me to run with it. And yeah, that's what I have for this evening. Do you guys have any final thoughts you want to say?
Well, morality is inevitable, and when the crisis comes, you cannot avoid that because why does the crisis come? There's some morality about it, and all your amoral pontificating will get you thrown into the dogs.
A little biblical, huh?
Yeah, and when it arrives, you're just gonna have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's coming, whether we want it to or not. I view this kind of episode as, us trying to speak to our admittedly small audience and say, hey, look, being prepared is always a good idea. Here's something to think about as you're preparing. And one of the things to think about is, as you're preparing, what are you going to do after the crisis? Because there's always an after the crisis. This extra idea of, oh, just burn it down and just let it keep on burning and it's never going to recover. Okay. That'll be the end of the human race. And I ain't for that because I have to live through that.
I want to feel, I just want to have a little bit of pity on our audience. Sorry, guys. Because if you understand this and you're ready when it happens, you're more apt to be chosen as the leader. And then you're going to have to be in charge. Just because you're thinking about it now. I don't wish that on you, but it is what it is.
Well, the man who is prepared for the eventuality is far less likely to be surprised by it, is far less likely to be unready for it, unprepared for it. So you will have a response, but even more important than a response to it, what you'll have is a calm demeanor to it. And when the whole world is falling apart and everyone's panicking, the guy who is calm and collected and has a couple answers, they could be right, they could be wrong. That guy is, yeah, as Steve said, the men are going to come for you, and they're going to try and Robert E. Lee you. Well, my goodness, we've gone for almost 3 hours, but we recently did a couple shorter ones, so you guys were due for a long one. And
There you go.
this is some pretty dense material to work through. So it's been fun. If you guys like what you heard, drop the video a like. I see that there are some on it already, so thank you for that. if you guys want to hear more, we're going to keep going on these topics. Yes, we're red pill, and pretty much every video we do, red pill comes up in some way or another. This one was no different, but we try to tie that into the larger world that we see. I sent in the chat or our private chat recently. I sent a video, and I posted it on my Twitter. It may come up in a future video that was just an absolute red pill gem out of China. So we love talking about this kind of stuff. We're not just red pill. We do other things. We look at other things. So you can also
maybe
ahead.
well, I'm leading next week. Maybe we should do one on that, because I keep observing things in China.
Okay.
And the social influences there seem to precede what's coming here.
I see it too. That's why my Twitter post was coming to you in a U.S. state near you in 2026.
So should we do that? Should we do one on the latest developments in China?
Hey, next
and
week
how
I'm
that
down for that.
how that might economically affect our future. I mean, not impact us, but how we will experience the same thing. And more importantly, how their sexual marketplace, marriage world stuff, and actions by women and men are coming here. Because we can see it in the extreme there. It's happening sooner. Why? Why does it happen sooner? Because they are closer to the abyss.
Yep.
They are feeling the pain, and then the actions come out. We're not feeling the pain yet. But when we feel the pain, it's probably going to be same thing here. Does that sound like a good idea for you guys?
Yeah.
I'm good with
Sounds
it. I
good.
like that idea.
I like how we keep picking on them over there. Last time with the tofu construction, a little bit today. Yeah.
So it's called tofu dreg.
That's the Chinese term for it. We didn't come up with that.
Tofu drag.
I redid our channel description a little bit, and I came up with a line, and the line is, "You're home for drama-free red pill analysis of a world gone mad," and that is what we're trying to do here. We're not just red pill, men's and male female divide issues, but we do look through everything we analyze through that lens of the truth above all else, not just in male and female relationships, but in all things. So, and yes, this one, there's a lot of speculation tonight. There's a lot of things where we can't point to and say, well, this is the truth, because we're speculating. But, well, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Leave us a comment if you disagree with us, or if you have any questions about the what we said, or where we got our data from. And we will see you. So on Saturday, the three of us will be on my wife's channel, and we will be talking to. She has another guest this week. We'll be talking to another YouTuber about single mothers and fatherless children. So Nick, if you can be there, and your connection is decent,
Do my best. Do my best.
I'm sure you have much to say on this particular topic. So yeah, that'll be Saturday, and then it sounds like next week we get to go look at the Chinese red pill. That'll be an interesting conversation as well.
Yeah.
So until then, gentlemen, we will see you all later.
There was a firefight! Son of a bitch!